Welcome back to Pastor Nick's Book Club, where I recommend a book for you to read and share my thoughts on why it might be worth your time. Let's begin this chapter. Today's recommended book is one that I hope you are already familiar with, and that is St. Paul's Epistle to the Romans. This is a very popular book of the Bible to read, and for good reason. In it, Paul gives a clear explanation of how God works righteousness in our lives. And personally, I recommend that you read it because I have led a couple Bible studies on the book, and each time I've fallen more and more in love with the message of the book of Romans. And the thesis statement of that message can be found in chapter 1, verses 16 and 17, which say, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed, from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith." And it is those two verses that Paul spends the rest of the book defending and explaining. Now, this could be a very short episode, and I could send you now to start reading, but there are a couple of things I want to share with you before we dive into the book of Romans. The first is the overall structure of the book, and how different sections of the book have different themes, all pointing back to the thesis statement made in chapter 1. And the second is a reading plan to help you get the most out of reading Romans. So to that first point, what is the overall structure of the book of Romans? There are 4 major sections to the book: chapters 1 through 4, chapters 5 through 8, chapters 9 through 11, and chapters 12 through 16. In chapters 1 through 4, Paul talks first about our failure to be righteous. We have failed to live up to God's expectations, His law. And even having been given the law and knowing His expectations, we fail. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We cannot be enough to earn God's forgiveness, but God gives us His forgiveness anyway. For we are justified by His grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. The righteousness is not something we earn, but something that we receive in faith in Christ. The next set of chapters, chapters 5 through 8, then, are a deep dive into God's grace for us. Unlike chapters 1 through 4, where the picture is large scale with a grand narrative of salvation in mind, chapters 5 through 8, while for everyone, really focus on the grace given to individuals. So St. Paul talks about how Jesus has brought life to sinners through Christ's baptism and promises salvation even for people who continue to fail, because God's love and grace is overwhelming. This then leads us into chapters 9 through 11. In these chapters, Paul answers an outstanding question, but what about the people of Israel? If God's righteousness is attained by faith alone, as he has claimed thus far in the book of Romans, what is the significance of being from Israel? Does Israel receive a special dispensation of grace for being children of Abraham? And Paul emphatically says no. Being from Israel does not make you righteous. The covenant of circumcision is not enough. Instead, in Christ, being Israel no longer has anything to do with lineage, but rather, being Israel is about being the people of the promise now found in Christ. So Paul tells us that even undeserving Gentiles like you and I get to be grafted into the family of God, because it is all about a righteousness not earned by works or by heritage, but a righteousness by faith. Which then leads to the final chapters of the book, chapters 12 through 16. In these chapters, St. Paul then talks about what it means to be a people who live out their righteousness by faith. You could call it the so what section of the book. We have been made righteous by faith, so what do we do now? Paul answers that question with some examples of what life as a redeemed and forgiven, and especially righteous, child of God should do. Those are the major themes of the book of Romans, and I want you to listen for them as you're reading through this book. But now let's talk about how I want you to go about reading the book of Romans. For the full experience, I want to encourage you to read the whole book 3 times. The first time you read it, I want you to read it as you would usually read the Bible. Read a chapter at a time. If you have a study Bible, look at the notes, whatever your usual practice might be. The second reading, though, I want you to read each major section in one sitting. So the first time you sit down to read, you should read chapters 1 through 4 without stopping. The next time, read chapters 5 through 8, next 9 through 11, and then finally 12 through 16. That way you can see those major sections and how they flow and they fit together. And then for the third read through, read the whole book in one sitting. It'll take time, but this will provide you the chance to get a sense of the whole book as you read. It may even help if you find a Bible that takes out the chapter and verse numbers and read it as one continuous narrative. I pray that as you read through Paul's letter to the Romans, that God would bless you and help you to see all the more clearly His love and grace poured out on you in Christ. And most importantly, that you find your righteousness and faith in Him.